I think it's so easy for us to view ourselves in light of our failures or the things that we're not good at. But I think we need to understand that every human has things they're good at and things they aren't. And we need to understand and support our strengths and not just worry about our weaknesses. Because your strengths are unique to you, and you need to bring them to the table and recognize that you have something unique to bring.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. I'm excited to announce that Everything Band has joined forces with several other music education-related podcasts to form the Music Teacher Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now into my next guest, Courtney Snyder. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me.
I'm happy to be here.
Courtney, can you tell the listeners what you're doing and who you are?
So I am the Associate Director of Bands at the University of Michigan, and I teach undergraduate conducting. I also teach an advanced level of either undergraduate or graduate conducting, but not for the conducting majors. I conduct the concert band, which is the sort of second music major band ensemble at the university. And I also direct the Michigan Youth Symphonic Band, which is a group of high school students predominantly who are in this Southeast Michigan, Northern Ohio area, perhaps sometimes a little bit farther away. They audition into the group and we rehearse once a week, and we perform 2 concerts a year. And so that's the predominant part of my job.
Excellent. And can you share your origin story, how you got started in music?
Sure. I grew up outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I grew up into a non-musical family. My mom definitely has a musical aptitude, but she never had an opportunity to develop that at all. So when I was very young, my brother and sister took piano lessons. They're 6 and 8 years older than me, so I'm quite a bit younger than them. And they hated piano lessons. But I know my dad said probably when I was maybe 3 or 4, he was excited because he thought my sister was practicing piano. And he came downstairs and I was the one who was playing. So, we had lessons in the house. And so the teacher would come over and teach the lessons. And I think I had just picked up on some things and I was just loving to tinker around on the piano. And that was probably the first kind of clue that I had some sort of musical aptitude and interest. I remember anytime we'd go over to my grandmother's house, she had a friend named Mary Crow, and she would always play kind of like honky-tonk piano and ragtime. And I always loved going if she was going to be there, because I would just beg her to play. So I definitely had that interest. I grew up in church and singing in our choir. And by the time I was in elementary school, that's when they come around. At our school, they came around in 3rd grade and with the string instruments. And I just wanted to play. So I said, I want to play violin. And my dad's like, well, if you're going to do it, you need to stick with it. I was like, okay. So that's really where my actual education started, other than me just tinkering around with things on my own. So I was able to really learn how to read at that point, and it was definitely a lot of fun. So I ended up playing violin predominantly as my instrument through elementary school and middle school. And I have an unusual story into band, I suppose. When I was in high school, I wanted to be in the marching band. And my sister, she's 6 years older than me, So she was, out of high school by this point, but she had been in the Guard. So I was like, well, I'll audition to be in the Guard. And so I joined the flag line. But then when I was in that, my first year, I realized all my friends were instrumentalists and I wanted to be with my friends. So I ended up auditioning on flute, but I ended up playing in the trumpet line. I wasn't very good. I ended up doing drum line then, and I loved that. And that really was something I felt pretty passionate about. But I went to college as a voice major and still really missed the instrumental part. I just hadn't found my instrument yet. So when I was in undergrad, it's really where I found that, one, I want to do band, and two, like trombone was a natural fit for me. So I never majored in a band instrument, although I had to take all the, methods courses, but I ended up playing trombone and taking more trombone lessons in graduate school as well. So that's kind of the instrument I landed on. I just never was able to do it as a major.
Wow.
That's how I guess I got into it.
That's fascinating.
I'm an unusual duck, I suppose.
Well, that you never hear a story like that. Usually someone, they're locked into their instrument right away and they just continue on. And so I want to ask if you see a benefit from all those varied experiences now.
It gave me a lot of experience with different kinds of music because I was hearing, standard orchestral repertoire as well as being in choir. Even playing on the piano once I started getting into it, I think I had a lot of repertoire at my disposal to really figure out what fit me. And I also, because I had played around on different instruments a bit, I realized I had a natural ability to understand how they worked and a physical knack to at least be able to understand basics of tone. I'm not playing these instruments proficiently by any stretch, but it was never awkward for me. Even in my methods classes, I knew how to be able to make a reed buzz. I knew how to make a flute embouchure. I knew how to make a trumpet sound or a trombone sound. That was all pretty flexible. And I had the dexterity for percussion. So I really loved taking those classes, and I really dug into the specifics of how do you get good on those instruments in terms of being able to assess that as a teacher. So I think that was a benefit. Also having string background, my first job in public school after I actually went to grad school right away was teaching band and orchestra. So because I had so much experience on violin, teaching strings was no big deal because I had so much experience in it. So I felt as comfortable in front of an orchestra as I did in front of a band. And certainly I would feel as comfortable in front of choir because I spent so much time singing in choir. I do think that singing in choir is also really beneficial because you listen differently and you feel intonation differently because you don't have a button to press. You just feel it in your body. And you see the whole score in front of you. So I think it's a little bit, I always encourage my students to do choir as well as instrumental because I think it really hones in on your listening in a different way.
Oh, I think singing in the choir in college for me was transformative.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe for me, it kind of led me away from music ed because I don't actually have an undergraduate in music ed.
Okay.
It's a long story. It's a winding road. My music ed professor passed away while I was in school. And so I was also composing at the time. And so I ended up getting a master's in composition.
Okay.
So anyway, but being in that choir really changed the way I viewed music. It's different than sitting back in the trumpet section.
Yeah, it is. It's something about making the music just with your body. I think that's part of it. You don't even have anything to really, you could hide behind your music technically, but you have nothing between you and the people you're singing to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no instrument to hold and kind of block your body.
What about special teachers when you were growing up? Was there anyone that really inspired you and taught you some lessons that maybe you still carry with you today?
Gosh, I don't think I would have realized this. Well, no, I know I didn't realize this at the time. And fortunately, I've been able to write her and tell her since. But my orchestra director in high school, her name was Shirley Miller. She was really fabulous. And she kind of had a quirky personality that I didn't always understand when I was a kid. But coming away from that orchestral experience, I was able to experience repertoire that I just didn't know existed. Again, not growing up in a musical family. My family didn't listen to anything classical by any stretch. And just having access to that and having pull-out lessons all the time with her, I was in better shape as a violinist than some majors when I went to school because of that educational experience I had from my public school and from her in particular. I just remember she would bring in composers and had a premiere of a piece, and I didn't understand how important that was back then, but I can look back on that now and recognize how important that was. So she was certainly really a valuable teacher to me. Are we talking about public school here?
Anything.
At pre-college? Certainly I had a math teacher. His name was Mr. Walker. He was my calculus teacher in high school. And I didn't get to this, but when I was deciding on my majors, I had to think about what I wanted to major in. And truthfully, I came to teaching before I decided music. And I'm also the first person from my family to go to college. So I wasn't following in the footsteps of anybody previously. And when I was thinking, well, if I want to teach, and I felt like I had a good knack for being able to break things down and help people and teach people, what do I want to teach? And it was either math or music. And when I applied to colleges, it was actually, I applied to one for math and one for music, and obviously chose the music one. So those two teachers in public school were quite important to me and really pushed me, and I think saw something in me maybe that I didn't quite understand yet. And in undergrad, I mean, my most influential teacher would be Jack Stamp. He was our band director, and he taught our undergraduate conducting. And in many ways, it was his passion for music that I wouldn't say was the real reason why I chose band, but it was certainly an influence on that. And he was very open to me, and he gave me individual lessons one term. And, I would come to a lot of the band rehearsals just to be able to sit in and hear the repertoire. And it really was that whole experience was very transformative for me becoming a band director. And he was the first teacher, and I've told him this, so it's not new, to really say, I'm really proud of you, and really saw what I could do. And that definitely had a huge influence on me.
Yeah, Jack was episode 75.
Yep, I actually have to remember that.
I have to promote. Yeah, he seems, I've never met Jack in person, only through sort of secondhand things. And he seems like such a fascinating and kind man.
For sure.
All right, Courtney. And so one of the things that's come to my attention in recent weeks, and when I first reached out to you about being on the show, I have a list. I'll just tell everybody on the air. I have a list of about 300 people who I'm hoping to contact to be on the show. And so I don't tell anyone who's on it because I probably won't get 300 episodes. And so you were on that list. And when I saw the And We Were Heard kind of be announced, and I saw your name on the project, it kind of was an intersection for me. It was like, okay, here's someone I want to have on the show. Here's something that's happening. And so I'd really like to ask you about that. And if maybe you can talk about what that project's all about.
Well, it started from a couple of different people. So some of the people that are on there. So Mary Kate, she's at Ohio Wesleyan. And I met her at CBDNA, the North Central Regional last, February. And so I certainly knew what her passions were and interests were, especially related to women in this field. Adam Collins is a high school band director, and he actually taught at Ypsilanti High School, which is where I used to teach several years ago. And so I've known him. He went to Eastern, so he was in this area because Eastern, Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor are right beside each other. So I've known him for a while, and he initially was the one, I think, who struck up the conversation because he and Mary Kate were having this discussion about composers, and I guess he had published his repertoire and was really excited, and Mary Kate kind of called him out and said, why are there no women on your repertoire list? And I think initially he was kind of offended by it, or at least bothered, like, well, I'm picking quality repertoire. And this is all public, even on the site, actually, because they talked about how this, how initially for her, just being willing to be forthcoming and saying, hey, you should be doing this differently, and him initially feeling defensive, but then realizing, oh, wow, I just never really thought about it from this perspective. It really opened his eyes to recognizing how important it is to be more diverse in the composers that he's representing with his repertoire. So he and I were also talking in relationship to Michigan and MSBOA, which is basically where the band and orchestra students are kind of filed through. That's where festival is done. It's the Michigan School Band and Orchestra Association. And how there aren't a lot of women on that list of the required music for all the bands to perform at festival. And so this kind of all started brewing. And then Kaylin Bove, who's a doctoral student in Kentucky, she obviously knows these people as well. So it all kind of came together and was like, hey, we're interested in this project of recording music by underrepresented composers and giving them an opportunity to have their music recorded so that it's available online. And as a person who is seeking a lot of new music all the time, going to websites and being able to hear and see scores is it's invaluable. And if I see a list of, composers' music, but I don't have anything to be able to tell what it's like, I'm not going to program it. And with so much easy access on the internet today, it really makes sense that we should at least, even if it's just a MIDI, but we should have these things available online. And it's going to be the best way to be able to get this music to be performed. So that's kind of all how it came about. It was like, let's try this and let's figure out ways to get ensembles to choose to record in some capacity, whether it's just recording and doing a session, rehearsing it a couple times, performing it live, could be a whole host of ways. But let's see if we can pair up composers' works that haven't been yet performed or don't have a recording of it with certain ensembles, and then they can use this as a tool to promote their music. I was like, well, I can't certainly do that this year because my program I set my repertoire in April and May for the following entire year. So there's not much room to budge. So I was like, well, how fast do we want to be able to do this? And it's kind of coming out now that really next fall and winter or spring will be the time that most of this will start getting done. But they were really pushing along and really organizing it. And Caitlin really got the website and Adam got the website really organized and setting it up. So it went a lot faster than I initially expected it to. But also, I definitely felt like this was incredibly valuable. And if I needed to set up grants or, however we needed to record the music, we would make it work. So when that went live, I don't think we necessarily expected to have such a quick, we knew it would be exciting, but it was really amazing to see so many composers and so many ensembles be like, yeah, this is great, let's do it, and immediately signing up. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what all comes from it. It's going to mean that we as the panelists have a fair amount of work to do because we've got to look through all the repertoire and pair them up with the appropriate ensemble. And we do have to look through the repertoire too to make sure it feels like it's going to fit. So there's a lot of I guess judging and discernment that's going to happen now that we have a lot of repertoire at our disposal to be able to peruse through.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really a great looking project, and I know it's right in the beginning stages. Can I just quickly mention the panelists? Just list them.
Please.
Yeah, and so they're Caitlin Bove, who you mentioned, and Adam Collins, who you mentioned. There's also Cliff Crooms, who's at LSU.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Thomas Gamboa from CCM. Mary Kate McNally, you, and Ogechi Kazu, who was also on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
She was episode 63. So, it looks like a terrific panel and a great idea. And so can we talk about the value that you see? Because one of the things that I'm doing, I'm back to being a band director for the first time in many years. Mm-hmm. And my goal is to play with every group I have. And I only teach 4th through 8th grade, but to play something by a piece by a female composer or a person of color with every group. Mm-hmm. And so I know the value of that. I understand the value of that. Can you talk to the listeners perhaps about the value of this?
Yeah, this is always can be taken controversially because they're like, well, just program quality repertoire. And I don't think that, performing pieces by women and minorities means you're all of a sudden not doing pieces of quality repertoire. But I see the value in it in that it's even at the really young ages, like these students need to see that this is a viable means for them. They need to see themselves not just in the band, but see themselves represented in the composers. I think that's really valuable. In looking through research related to even women band directors, part of the reason why there are more now is because there are more in it. Like when you see yourself represented and you see another woman in that field, you're more likely to believe you can achieve that. And it's not that we just want to promote a bunch of other composers to come up through, but we want them to recognize that their voice can be heard and their experience can be brought through by seeing somebody else like themselves coming, writing this kind of music. I think too that so much, because of our history being so dominated, obviously by male composers, but predominantly also white male composers, that's just the history of our European history of most of our Western classical music. With all of that history, it's hard to kind of compete against that because we tend to still, we're going to perform pieces that are considered in the canon. But if that's where we're focused, we're never going to get out of this box of the white male composer. So we have to be deliberate about making sure that by performing works by women and minority composers, giving more opportunity to that, we're helping to create a sort of tipping point. We look to each other's repertoire as inspiration. I certainly comb through like the CBDNA report and the programs they go through. I like to look through that to see what other people are performing. By more people performing it too, it gets promoted in other places like publishing sites. But if it's been predominantly white male, then that's what's going to be promoted. So when you're going to those places, that's what you're seeing. By being deliberate about including women and minorities, we're helping to spread that more so that more people will recognize, oh, this piece was performed, I should check this out. So much of what's been promoted is just not friendly to women and minorities.
Right. We're fighting years and years of inertia here.
Exactly.
From my perspective, I'm a white male composer, so I certainly don't have anything to say about certain things. But I do know that as a living composer, one of my great frustrations for most of my professional career is that I'm fighting against people who've been dead for hundreds of years.
Exactly.
And so now you take this problem, and these people who were playing from the canon who have been dead for hundreds of years are all white males.
Exactly.
And so now we have a compound problem. We're not playing living composers, and then of the living composers we're only playing a fraction that are by women and people of color.
Right.
And so you've got like two compounded problems on top of each other. That's one of my big frustrations.
Exactly.
So we have to do everything we can to try to fix that. And in every way, I think we should be playing more living music, but that's a different argument, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's also truthfully one of the reasons why I ended up in band.
Me too.
Was because of the newness of it in comparison to orchestra and choir, that canon doesn't go back so many centuries.
I agree. Yeah, and it goes back to John Mackey's article, this tongue-in-cheek article about the concert band versus the orchestra.
Right.
And he's right about that, and that's why I like the band world, because it's welcoming of people who are writing now.
Yeah.
So Courtney, I know that women conductors have faced many challenges, and we see this growing sort of number of conductors, especially in the collegiate ranks, females. And I've had Cynthia Johnson-Turner and Emily Moss and Emily Trinan on the show. And so can you talk to me about this and how you see the challenges we still face and how it's getting better, perhaps?
Well, I think for sure it's getting better just strictly by looking at the numbers. Mm-hmm. Certainly there are more women at the collegiate level, even the high school level, than there have been in the past. And the reason I maybe don't say as much middle school is because, as is typical with anything kind of educationally related, we tend to have women more at the elementary and the middle, and then more men at the later middle, and then into high school, and obviously into college. So seeing the growth in high school and college in particular is where you can see a difference is definitely brewing, or something has definitely changed. In relationship to the challenges still, there's still just an inherent biases, I suppose, that we have in relationship to viewing women in leadership positions. It's not that women don't do it or haven't, and not that women haven't been able to be successful. There's just still some challenges that we as women also have in how we perceive each other, not just men perceiving women that way. I think because there is still a very strong masculine mindset to being a band director, and that there's still an inherent kind of quality there that people still question or are surprised by it. I experienced it more as a high school director, I think, than as a college director, truthfully. Maybe because it was earlier that I was a high school director, where I would just have people surprised. Or they go up to my assistant, who's a man, and talk to him like he's the head director. That's actually happened at every job that I've had. And it's kind of, on one hand, you kind of laugh it off, but on the other, it's a little bit like, okay, really? We are now in 2018. This shouldn't be an automatic assumption. But that is still there. I think there's also still, we certainly know there's research related to how students can perceive women as leaders and in comparison to men, and there's some inherent biases there. So there's still some things to battle through, I guess. Or again, the more women are in these positions, the more it's going to become normal. So perhaps that will help erase some of these biases. Certainly calling them to light will help it, but it's, culture is not the easiest thing to change.
No, and it's slow to change. So I guess a more productive question then would be, what advice do you have for maybe young girls or young women who want to be composers or want to be conductors and are looking at this and perhaps are put off by this or somehow discouraged in some way?
There has to be some form of just sort of a self-analysis of going, this is just what I love. And I'm going to do it, whether I see myself represented in the older generation or not. I know for myself, I never had a female band director.
Mm-hmm. I never did either.
But I realized there was just something in me that realized I would love conducting. And I think when you have a passion for something, you just have to go for it, no matter what you see. And you'll find somebody in that process who is going to help recognize what's in you and going to help you along the way. I do think that life can certainly do that. I think too, with at least now, with the world being so small with the internet, if you have a passion about that, there's a way to find somebody that's so much different than when I was going through school, that you will find a woman conductor at any level now, whether it's band, orchestra, choir, you're going to find it. There are women in the professional orchestral ranks now who are definitely making really big splashes in this community. So there are ways to be able to see yourself represented by at least going on the internet, and certainly plenty of women composers, or if you're a minority, minority composers too, but there's ways to be able to hear that music and see yourself represented, even if you can't do that within your own community.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's one of these things where people see problems and they feel like they can't change it, so they don't try.
Yeah, I think how else does the community change, or how else does the world change unless people just get frustrated enough to actually think about it, right?
Small steps.
Yeah.
If we all do something, then everything begins to move.
And you do have to have a sense of belief in yourself. And even if you get pushback, if there's something enough in there to go, okay, I realize that, use that as a way to push harder, That sounds horrible, I guess. It's like, why should you have to work harder? But I think that's not necessarily a woman thing. That's just a person thing.
No, I agree with that, because it's an individual thing too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what's frustrating is that there are barriers put up. And people, I don't want, I want to be careful here, right?
Well, I think let's maybe put it, it's easy in your life, depending on where you are with relationship to your own maturity and whatnot, where maybe you aren't quite ready yet, but you will be ready later as long as you keep pushing along.
Yeah, what I was going to say is everyone who wants a career in music, especially if you're aspiring to great things, is going to face challenges. There shouldn't be extra challenges there because it's hard enough for everybody.
Exactly. That's true. I think the biggest thing that we need to come away with in this is that you have to have a sense of believing in yourself. And you have to look within to really know what it is that you want from your life. And if there's something that you know you have to contribute, you just have to keep believing that and keep stoking that fire, that flame. And I do think that can lead you to the right people to help you along the way.
So you talk about this idea of leading to the right people. And so what do you mean by that? What are you trying to say about that?
I don't know if it's sort of a serendipitous part of life. But when I went to University of Pennsylvania for undergrad, and I thought I was going to be a high school choir teacher. But I ended up meeting Jack Stamp. I didn't go there because of Jack Stamp. I didn't know who Jack Stamp was. But by becoming passionate about what I did and really digging into, because I was there as a music major, I really loved it. I dug into it. I got really, it stoked a flame that was like, I've got to really make sure that I'm continuing this flame. And finding then the people at that university, your professors, the students around you who are equally excited. I think by finding that and kind of seeking those people out, you're finding the right people. Again, that wasn't something I had planned for years, but I was in the place I was in, so I sought out the people that were the best people in the place I was in.
I talked about this a little bit with Mark Schachter on the show. Mm-hmm. And just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I talked with Charlie Mangini.
Yeah.
And Charlie is fascinating. He, because he tells these wonderful stories.
Right.
But all of his stories are how he went from this one famous person to the next famous person to Dr. Tim to so-and-so, one after another. And I asked him in that episode, what is it that, and I think we talked about this with Mark too, what is it that attracts talent to talent? Or how is it that we find these people in our lives that help us this way?
And I think that is part of, everything is connections. And we are community. People are meant to be in community. So you don't have to be that far removed from somebody you might feel remarkably removed, but then in this community especially, you realize, oh wow, I'm only like 3 people away from that person.
So I'm thinking about my listener who, how do we foster that? How do we build that so that we're prepared for these interactions or these moments?
Well, I think on both sides of the coin, whether you're the person who's seeking out or the person who could be one to, help make that connection, I think it's paying attention. It's being aware of what you see around you. And I'll maybe share a story here that maybe can illuminate this a little bit. So I mentioned that I teach undergraduate conducting, and I do predominantly teach music ed students in there because obviously they're required to take that for especially both semesters. But I had a student in there who was a performance major who had been music ed and kind of dropped the music ed portion of it. And I had a gnawing feeling at me, and she was taking my conducting class. And I just had this feeling that she wants to be a band director. And I know she dropped it because she's like dealing with prioritizing things, but I just feel like she wants to be a band director. And I thought about it enough, and I was a little concerned to bring something up to her. And I literally never dealt with this with any of my other students. But I knew her well enough, and I said, hey, and I'm not going to say who she is, but I've said, are you sure you don't want to be a band director? And she was like, immediately like, I do want to be, it just having me come to her saying, I really feel like this is something you actually want. And I know you're not doing it right now, and if you're offended by this, you don't have to listen to anything I'm saying, but I really think that this is something you want. And she felt encouraged by me coming to her and telling her that, because she had been feeling that way. But she didn't quite have, she had some barriers to kind of work through in terms of people that were important to her. And she just needed somebody to come alongside her and say, yeah, I totally see this, and you need to do it. I think it's that kind of paying attention and the willingness to kind of speak up and just be honest. I kind of sometimes, if I look back on my earlier life, I wish that maybe I had seen that from some other people alongside that had just been paying attention more, to go, oh my gosh, like my elementary music teacher saying, oh, wow, you just played that on piano, but you've never taken lessons. Maybe you should be taking lessons. Like that kind of thing. I think we should be paying attention to each other more. And when we have that sort of gut instinct, navigating a way to be able to speak it. I think about that in relationship, again, why I mentioned before, like when Dr. Stamp had said, the first person to kind of say he was proud of me, like that was important for me to hear, to reinforce that what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing. Just those kinds of communication, that kind of honesty, I think we can do that more. And we get so siloed, and we are all very, very busy. But I think we need to have some time to kind of reflect and be aware of our surroundings a bit, and just try to be astute or perceptive about what's going on around.
Yeah, that's good advice. It's really true. All right, so let's talk about new music and commissions. And so what kind of experiences and what do you do with commissions and new music? And I know as a band director at a place like the School of Music at the University of Michigan, you're around a lot of this. And so what does that look like for you?
Well, the predominant amount of commissions has been at least related to symphony band, because the symphony band is the premier ensemble. Not to say that the concert band hasn't involved in them before, but in my job here in the past, this is now my 5th year, we've actually just done one actual premiere. We've been on some consortium, like on a consortium, and have had pieces performed as being members of that, and actually have 2 of those coming up this coming term. But the first one that I specifically sought out kind of came through talking to a couple different people, and just kind of researching what I wanted. So I'll tell you about that particular piece here. I wanted to, my goal as a person who commissions music is to kind of fill voids in the canon of repertoire. And at a place where I often do pieces with chamber winds, I wanted to commission something for chamber winds that was a more non-traditional grouping of instruments, like not to reinforce the canon of like the harmony ensemble and the pairs of instruments coming out of the orchestra and whatnot. But I wanted to have some things that are different, because I get to do it, I don't want to always feature the same instruments. So that was one of those goals, that I wanted to seek out a composer who would write for more non-traditional groupings of instruments. And then I had specifically decided to try to bridge this gap of Indian Carnatic music in this instance, but traditional Indian classical music with the Western classical music world, which are not the easiest kind of 2 things to bring together, although they're not as disparate as maybe I initially thought. And the reason I had come up with that decision was talking with Lindsay Boyd, who was a graduate student at the time at the University of Minnesota, but she had studied in India and was teaching at one of the American schools in India, and she's still back there. And she had been talking about how she had written a piece for a young band to help bridge that gap that was related to, I think she's in northern India, so she's more Hindustani style music, and Carnatic is more South India. But that kind of created an inspiration for me. I was like, wow, that'd be really fascinating to see if there's a way to bridge that gap, but at a more advanced level, something that my group could perform. And this was a couple summers ago, I had maybe just got on the internet to try to find composers who maybe had some Indian background. And I came up with a composer's name's Michael Schachter. And I really don't know exactly, because it feels like so phenomenally serendipitous that this happened. But he had studied in India and had studied Indian vocal singing and was a doctoral student at the University of Michigan. And when I think about that, I'm like, I'm at the University of Michigan. I want to commission a piece for some element of bridging Indian classical music with Western classical music. And there's a doctoral student here at the University of Michigan who actually could do this. So I contacted him and said, hey, I'm looking for this kind of piece. And initially I was thinking maybe it should be somebody who was a singer to join with that. But in talking with him, he was like, no, I don't think we should do the singing thing at all. I think it should all be instrumental based. And I have some ideas. So we came together and created a piece called Karnatakamallika, which is written for, it's been a while. I'm thinking it's 8 or 9. It might be 8 instrumentalists and 1 percussionist. And it's a challenging piece, but it's really quite amazing. And it takes on elements of, it has an element of a rag, kind of the first rag that you would learn if you were studying Indian classical music. And it has some elements of bending pitch, but it certainly doesn't have like all the quarter tones and whatnot. It fits within the musical realm of what we deal with our instrumentalists. But it's written for just wind instruments. But the timpani part is really fascinating and quite challenging. But it has elements as well as the clapping and the tinging in there as well that the students perform. And it's structured in a way that's similar to what Carnatic music would be structured. So we came up with this really unique piece, and we're able to perform. We performed it twice, actually. That just is, there's nothing like it in the canon. And I'm really proud of that because it's something new and unique. And it's also by a composer who hadn't written anything for a wind ensemble of sorts before. So another piece that I won't be premiering until April of next year was I specifically wanted to seek out a composer of color, and I wanted to seek out a woman ideally. And so we'll be premiering a piece by Valerie Coleman, who's now at Miami, but she was the flutist for Imani Winds. She just retired from that. Kind of the founder, actually, of Imani Winds. And now she's at Miami, kind of running up their chamber music program and also still doing, obviously, a lot of composing. So she'll be writing a piece for us as well. But that'll be actually for the full ensemble.
That's cool. That's awesome. And so that'll be in the spring?
Yeah, it'll be in April 2020.
So, Courtney, we're kind of getting towards the end of we're kind of getting towards the final questions. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you one last question before we get there. And maybe this is something that you tell your conducting students who are going to go be music educators. But what's one piece of advice you give those conducting students who are going to be band directors?
My initial reaction is trust yourself in the first year. That first year is really hard, especially if you're like the main director. And, when you're coming into a new program, there's just a lot of new challenges when you're the new person taking over there. But keep working. And even though you might not trust yourself, just keep working and keep learning and keep absorbing and keep pushing forward. So I think that one, I know for myself, that first year was really challenging. And sometimes I'm like, can I really do this well? And I think you have to trust yourself in that year and just know that it's going to be, once you get through that first year, I think things get a bit easier. So that's probably my first bit of advice. And 2 is never stop learning. Keep knowing that there's always things that you're going to need to do to get better. And that's okay. Experience does matter. So keep taking these experiences, opportunities to learn, and recognize that if something feels awkward, you embrace the awkward, you hug it, you say, okay, awkward means I'm learning. And you keep moving forward. And eventually that awkwardness will start to dissipate as you get better and better at what you do.
Where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I think ultimately that comes down to if the students are really competing against themselves, meaning are they continually improving along the process? Are they looking at this competition as an opportunity to get better, or are they just looking at it for the trophy? If they're just looking at it for the trophy, I think that's an unhealthy level. But if they're recognizing that along this process, it's kind of giving them incentive to continue to get better themselves, then I think it can be healthy.
And so one of the problems that I see among music educators is that we often are the last car out of the parking lot, as the old saying goes. Mm-hmm. How do you find a work-life balance as a music educator?
Well, I think that's always something I'm trying to navigate. I think I don't necessarily know that I've achieved it completely, because you will always have work to do. But, my husband is not in the music field at all, and he will always have work to do too. There's just times that you have to shut things off. For myself, I've got kids. I have to be home to be able to get them home from school. So that's kind of a demand that I'm responsible from other human beings. So I've got to be there for them, and they are obviously my first priority. So that keeps me a bit in check. And they're of an age as well that I'm not going to be able to get work done if I'm home with them, because they won't let me. They're both 5 years old, and they want my attention when I'm home, and they deserve my attention. So that I think that keeps me in check a bit, in the fact that I have to be responsible for them. That doesn't mean that I don't do work once they go to bed. But I also have to be proactive in scheduling time with my whole family, and my husband in particular, to say, okay, well, this is a night that we have to dedicate to ourselves. I think there does have to be kind of a schedule. And sometimes you have to be really proactive very early in that schedule. Both my husband and I travel for our work, so we do have to be particular about scheduling time for ourselves to be able to do something, and getting a sitter and whatnot. I think as well, there's just certain times when I know I'm not going to do work this time. And you have to choose it. Because I think if you don't choose it, you will choose the job. But that can create a lot of strife in your family.
Courtney, the next question is my big question. And this one is, what are the challenges facing band or music education, and how can we best meet them in the 21st century?
I think the challenge is individualized education versus the collective. How are we doing with curriculum beyond just the repertoire we perform? I think repertoire serves a part in the curriculum, but if repertoire is all that the students are getting in their music education, then the tuba player is going to get a different experience than your clarinet player or your percussionist, et cetera, because their music is just so different. And the levels of what they can achieve and the challenges that each of those instruments face as they're learning the instrument, it just makes things very different. You're not going to have a tuba player who's going to be able to play technically all those things that a flute player might be able to, because their music doesn't have that. So we have to make sure that we're thinking about individualized education while we're teaching them in an ensemble. And I think, to me, that's still something we have to do better as a whole. I think sometimes it's still just this concept of we just sound good at a band, at a concert. And that shouldn't be the end goal of being a music teacher. It's just to make a band sound good.
Any thoughts about how we do that?
I maybe have some non-traditional thoughts. And I don't have to deal with this the same way as a college professor, because my students are taking music in so many other classes. So I'm not the primary music teacher for them. I think there has to be more reading of music in general, and getting students to understand that sight reading and being able to read at sight is a mark of musical fluency. So just like we would expect a student to be able to read a book, we would want our students to be able to read music and not have to have somebody else do it for us or for them. That there needs to be more reading consistently. And I know that contests, not all of them, but I know a lot of music festivals and state requirements have sight reading as a list, but that doesn't necessarily mean people are always spending time sight reading. I think there could be ways to maybe especially if you're in the beginning part of the year, have a concert earlier, and maybe don't make the music quite as hard so that they can, they can be reading more and they can grasp it more and have a concert kind of quicker, because that ramp up period isn't so far away. I think students do tend to rise to the occasion more when there's more things on the plate. That certainly has to be balanced because you don't want to overwork them. But sometimes I think about that. I'm like, maybe just doing more concerts, but with easier music, would get them in front of music more often and getting them reading. And it kind of puts the demand on them to have to learn how to read faster.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's so many demands on the.
So much.
What was that?
There's just so much to learn.
Well, there's a ton to learn, and then the demands on a high school band director and a program are so great.
Right.
And again, we're fighting the inertia of a system that's been in place for decades now.
Right. And I mean, and the system was not created with a curricular mindset. It was created in many ways as for one, a way to give musicians jobs after the war. And with this kind of extracurricular mindset of we're going to perform, or it's marching band related or whatnot, it didn't really come into the educational system with a specific musical curricular mindset.
Yeah.
And
sure.
so I think having to change that has been a challenge. Just like we talked about earlier with changing culture is slow. There's plenty of stuff to do to try to get your band to sound good.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that doesn't always mean that you're getting the best individualized education for your students. And so you have to really find the balance between that to make sure you're doing both.
Right. And where you put your priorities too.
Right.
This is a big conversation for sure. And this is, for those who are in the know, who teach college or are aware of it, the manifesto that came out a few years ago. We all know that one, right?
From CMS,
right? So, that's one of the key things in there.
Yes.
Is individualized. And so that sort of shook up, I'll tell from my point of view, when I first heard about that, I was at the Society of Music Theory conference.
Okay.
And boy, did a ripple go through that room.
Yeah.
And then the other community that it really affected was the band community.
For sure.
And so it's interesting that, we kind of have this sort of Prussian collective education, but music was really always taught kind of as a apprentice master kind of thing,
right?
More individual. So we have this sort of hybrid thing. Yeah,
we do have a hybrid.
Boy, I'm getting all philosophical. Let's move on.
But this is why we're struggling to try to figure out the solution, because there's so many ways to do it, but there's only so much time. Exactly.
Courtney, if you could give your 18-year-old self some advice, perhaps at your high school graduation, what would you tell yourself?
I would say that, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, but that I need to recognize what your strengths are, and don't just be sidelined by your failures. I think for a lot of time I defined myself by my failure, or I wasn't, I was just always afraid of my failure, people not valuing me because I didn't do this and this, well, or whatever. But to really see what my strengths are and recognize that I'm valuable for who I am as a person, but I'm not just defined by my failures or my weaknesses.
If you had a choice, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band that you would conduct, and why?
The piece that comes to my mind is I'm like, would that be the best closer for a concert? The piece that just comes to my mind is a piece that was probably a seminal piece in terms of me recognizing that this kind of sound exists, would be In the Mountains Rising Nowhere by Schwantner. Stravinsky was my first favorite composer, and it was the Infernal Dance from the Firebird that made me go, wow, I've never heard anything like this before. But after having been a musician for one, like studying in college, to hear that piece was life-changing for me. And I think that would be the piece I'd want to go out with.
Good choice. I think you're the first person to mention that piece.
Cool.
That's good. Yeah, absolutely.
A unique contribution.
Well, you didn't say, Lincolnshire Posey, so this is good.
Yeah.
Which is...
I love Lincolnshire Posy, but I don't have an affinity for that piece the way I do for...
Yeah, right. I'm the same way. Lincolnshire is great, but I never had that moment, that peak experience playing it or conducting it, that would make me want to do it at the end.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time that mine would be Crown Imperial by William Walton.
Oh. That's an unusual choice.
Well, it's because that band director that I mentioned in college passed away. And that was the piece that he wanted to do last. And he told us that. And then he passed away. And then we did it on his memorial concert.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a dry eye in the place.
Yeah.
And so those emotional moments matter.
For sure.
Is there anything coming up? And now this will live on the internet for a long time. And so it may not be immediate. But is there anything that you'd like to share or promote?
I have a premiere coming up. That's the one with Valerie Coleman. But I don't want to say just what it is yet because it's a unique idea and I don't want other people to copy.
Sure. Okay. That's fine.
And so that's certainly one thing that's coming up that I'm very excited about for many different reasons.
I think you mentioned it. I think people heard that it's going to be in May of 2020.
Yeah, it'll be in 2020. But I don't want to say specifically what it's about just yet.
That's fine. I don't think you have to.
And that's one thing that I'm pretty excited about. Other than... Well, actually, you know what? I will say this. I'm the president-elect of Women Band Directors International.
Oh, cool.
And we're really trying to broaden that organization to have a bigger, broader reach. And one of the things we're doing is we started a competition for women composers to write a piece or to kind of promote their pieces that haven't been premiered yet or haven't been performed yet at a younger level, like a grade 3 level, to try to generate more women composers at that level. And so that's a competition with a good stipend, a 3,000 plus travel for a new piece written at a grade 3 level. It's going to get a premiere. The people in the organization will be able to buy into it to get access to that piece. It'll get a lot of promotion and a lot of performances. So that's something I'm really excited about. And it's actually just opening now, but the composers submitting works will start at the beginning of the year. And that's something that we're hoping to be an annual event. And maybe we'll open it beyond women, but since it's Women Band Directors International, we're promoting specifically women in this instance. So that's certainly something that I think is important and on the horizon. Also, we'll be having a summer conference in June at DePaul University, and we're really excited about the things that we're having on that particular conference. And I'm really just excited to try to build a broader community of women band directors. And it's just really exciting to see people come on board, and we're promoting each other and supporting one another's work instead of this sort of competition. I'm jealous of your work, but which has been so much of what the past is, especially when you're a small group of people and there's only a few of you in the realm. Like when you see somebody else's success, you can feel issues of jealousy, and we all have that as humans, but it's been a bit more dominating in women just because they've been such a minority. But now that we're becoming less of a minority, we're able to see and promote and support one another. I think that's really, really important. And I'm excited about WBDI's contribution to that.
Cool. And so that is, for everyone who's listening, I'm going to link this on the show notes, but it's womenbanddirectors.org. And then one of the links is, there's a link on that page to this competition. And so I'll definitely link it all for the listeners.
Great.
So, Courtney, how can people get in touch with you?
Probably email is the best. My email is cksnyder, SNYDER, @umich.edu.
Excellent. Courtney, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mark. It was an honor and just a lot of fun to be here.